Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a podcast aimed at bringing our ancient indigenous Nordic wisdom traditions and perspectives, bringing these to bear on the challenges that we face in our modern world. I am your host, Georg, and we will often be joined by co-hosts and producers, Brian and Laurie. You can find our bi-monthly episodes on most major podcasts platforms. And if you enjoy this and like to read as well, please look up our blog with dozens of articles on health-related topics at www.teutonichealing.com. And now, let's get on with our show. Welcome to our podcast, Shamanic Voices. I'll be one of your hosts here, Georg Beckman. I'll be joined by Laurie, who will be helping and interviewing me at some points during this. This will basically be kind of a monologue, which we don't usually do. For those of you catching it visually, it won't be much to see. It'll be a man sitting here and reading something. And it's only fair to put it out there to you who are listening in our audience that this is going to be fairly disturbing stuff to talk about. We're talking about the life here, the life of my late daughter who passed away last April of 24. And what she passed away from was a long period of addiction. She'd come out of it about 5 years previously. And so the topics today will be kind of what addiction does to the people in it, or the people around it, what it may consist of. And I'm sure that Laurie's going to have some very timely and good questions about it. Her not having dealt with it directly, but, it's important also to get the perspective of those of you who haven't dealt with it directly, although from what I can gather, about 1 out of 10 of us will be in an addictive disorder, what's called SAD, or substance abuse disorder, at some point in our lifetimes. That's just a statistical fact. And the others around that individual will be dealing with the consequences thereof. So, with no further ado, you're going to see me, those of you who are visual here on YouTube. I'll simply be reading because I wrote out a long paper on this to try to organize all the thoughts together, as one might imagine, about something as sensitive as a family member no longer with us. But let's see what we can learn from this life and this challenge, which we're all as a society going through to some extent or the other. All our lives are an intersection of various forces. These sometimes collide, sometimes merge, interweave their tendrils in creating our ongoing lived experience. We are formed by what we are born into, the culture, the family, the education that we shall receive, the media, and, yes, the food and drink that we consume, the uses to which we put our bodies, active or sedentary. All these forces collaborate to shape us, and, of course, we shape ourselves through our choices. We chose this possible mate over that. We chose to read this set of novels over that one. We chose to study this discipline for our livelihood instead of all these others. We chose to continue living where we grew up, or whether it fit us or not, or we moved to something more personally compatible to the self, or not. All these factors collide in the complexity which our ancient wisdom traditions taught was the weaving done at the well of the Sisters of Fate at the base of the World Tree, the Nornerspruner at the base of Yggdrasil, as the tapestry of an individual's life. The weave, if you will, of the Sisters of Fate. This was a common understanding amongst the Greek pagans as well. Along with this, what happens to us in a lifetime can, well, simply happen to us. It can be mere happenstance, not some sort of divine, quote, plan, end quote, plotted out by the Lizard of Oz from behind a curtain, who warned the faithful, do not look behind the curtain. In other words, despite a modern retreat into the superstition of imagining that we have some sort of wholly planned existence in which everything, quote, happens for a reason or happens for a purpose, the fact is that we are reason-demanding animals who expect or even demand that events that we experience make some sort of sense to us. When they don't, we hallucinate a divine order, where such events are planned for and do make sense in a way that is beyond the capacity of the Goyim to understand. I understand that that gives us some sort of comfort compared to the cattle out in the pasture, where some will be struck by lightning while others survive and keep chewing their cud and grazing on the grass. So in that respect, we're different. But we demand that it makes sense. We can't imagine how it would be that we don't get any sort of comfort out of an experience or any sort of understanding out of it. When I think now of all these themes and where they meet, I think of my daughter, Kirsten, who passed from us on the 2nd of April, 2024. When I think of how all these themes meet, I think of how it has taken me this long to process the loss, since one of the fictions with which we greet the future is that I'll be the one taking this final nap and saying goodbye to my offspring and remaining here. It seems to violate some sort of law of nature as a parent, especially a very involved parent, never too far from events in your offspring's lives, when you experience the loss of their going before you. All these themes meet in her life and in the story of it, all of which I can't relate in the time of a podcast. Just the highlights. In the larger creek where all the smaller streams converge, such as the weaving, where the Fada and Shiksal, the threads of fate, converge in a coherent weave that is that synthesis of the individual choices, the expressions of the faculties at work in the world, and the pre-existing conditions of that world with which they interact, forming the weave that becomes the individual life, the individual existence, the lived experience.
Can I jump in with a question?
Of course.
You mentioned being a very involved parent. When you have a child who has extra challenges, do you feel like the parents are more involved than you? As a parent, you're more engaged?
Well, I think that it does call on the healer or the nurturer in you when you have a child who's in difficulty, who's in challenge by beset by an unseeable villain, in this case, the compulsion exerted on their lives by the drug, whatever it happens to be, the addictive substance.
Because I would think as a parent, it kind of pulls you in more.
Oh, yes, of course it does. Well, that is with you or me. I think you had a similar sort of thing with a child who had severe challenges, but with some parents, it just makes them run away from it, escape into, well, I can't do anything about this. And I've met couples I've helped with kids who were, for instance, autistic, or kids who were in addiction, and one parent or the other would be very involved. And surprisingly, sometimes it was the dad who was a nurturer who didn't back off, and mom just got busy with her bowling or tending to her horses and just social engagements outside of the house to get away from the problems, and pretty much left Junior to his own devices, with the understanding that, well, I can't do anything about it anyway, which in a sense is true. You can try to provide a structure, a framework, some sort of guidance toward normalcy, but that's about it. There's not that much that anybody but the individual in addiction themselves can do to alter it. Anyway, she had been sober for over 5 years at the time of her passing. She had used recreational drugs a little bit, and occasionally in high school, although I didn't find that out until much later. And yet, in those high school years, she was still cited as a presidential honors scholar at her rural high school. She still remained functional there, pursuing her other activities, including playing piano. There was a rental in her room for all the years she was here with me, dance, and even drama classes. She read with great interest, especially historical novels. She did well in nursing school and felt that she'd found her niche there, especially in geriatric nursing. Sometime in the year after her graduation, she was with a friend, waiting as the other young lady went into a big box store to buy something. And unbeknownst to my daughter, when this other young lady came out, some store security had followed her because she had shoplifted something, which got their attention. They searched the car, and in the car was a pot pipe. And Kirsten had the pot pipe in her purse, apparently. So that was the first time that anybody became formally aware of the fact that she might have a drug problem. Not that pot always leads to serious stuff. It doesn't. Some states have legalized it, and they're not running into a severe uptick of people abusing. So don't get that impression. But this was the first warning to us, those of us hoping to hold on to her normalcy, that there might be something amiss. And so this was the first time that we became aware of this. And for another few years, she apparently gradually became involved more into drugs. And it was a shock when this first happened to the parents and the grandparents, all four of whom were here and were involved in her with her life. A friend of hers shortly prior to this event, a young man she'd gone to school with, whom I was coaching in what is today known as mixed martial arts, told me that he was very concerned about her because amongst her peers, she was known to be what he called a, quote, garbage can junkie, end quote, a term which I'd never heard of before, meaning you would take anything to change your state of mind. This wasn't evident from the outside yet at that point. Now, I was not completely naive about such substances or the results of involvement with them. I had, after all, been an adult in the 60s. I'd seen peers do really irrational things in pursuit of a change of consciousness, which I supposed people had always done, just as when as a child I thrilled holding on to the outside of the then plentiful merry-go-rounds at public parks before the lawyers sued them out of existence, and all of them had speed controls installed later. I liked the dizzy feeling. It was momentarily exhilarating, but it, like other, testosterone-fueled activities that involved me with intensity and unthinkable flow of an unthinking flow state, like rock climbing, tree climbing, or free fighting in my local martial arts tournaments, all served the same master, shifting the gears of consciousness, experiencing an altered state. When I was about 16, pursuing my hobby of viewing paperbacks at local newsstands, I found books by Alan Watts and others about Zen and meditation, and started meditating, which my parents found weird or very uncomfortable to witness. What a waste of time, I was told. But here also, the inner quiet, the breaking free from the chains of causation, and simultaneously feeling comfortable with the lack of stimulation, and the quieting of the inner voice, getting the inner gerbil off the wheel. Later, on my own, from about age 17 as a young adult, I did see some of my peers doing things which now, living out of the house, I was exposed to, living on my own. which I was afraid to even try, like consuming a Jemson weed, a natural datura pod, and to external appearances, getting very, very ill, even while encouraging others to use it. I saw a guy do this, and this applied to the listed illegal drugs as well. I quickly decided that the risks far outweighed any possible benefits, and that life was challenging enough in possession of all my faculties, and that the distortions of a recreational substance could only make the mind less sharp and life more challenging, and I would be less adaptable, less alert. That was my journey.
Can I ask you a question about the term garbage can junkie?
Yeah.
I've heard people, I knew someone once who had a child who got into pot addiction, and the pot led to other things. And when his son was caught, that he was told that pot is what they call a gateway drug, and that the pot leads to other things. But I'm wondering if the real problem is that the child who gets into this has a desire for some kind of altered state, and they're willing to go to drugs. Maybe pot is just the easiest one to get. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think that the underlying drive to escape their circumstances, escape their reality, or at least escape their current frame of mind, their current frame of consciousness, is the driver. Pot's simply a modality. I give an example. One time when I lived in Oregon, I heard some kind of like a giggling in the bushes behind my place, and I went out there to see what was going on. I thought somebody might be trying to break in through the bottom floor or something. Turned out that wasn't it at all. It was a couple of teenage boys, I think only slightly older than my son at the time, who was living with me. He was, I guess, maybe 11 at the time, I'm thinking. And they were out there with a can, strangely, this is true, of WD-40 and a large plastic bag. I asked them what the hell they were doing. I could smell the lubricant all over the place back there. They sprayed the bushes. They were both kind of staggering around. They said, there was a term they used for it. Huffing, I think is what they said.
Yes, I remember that.
Well, I grabbed the WD-40 from them, tried to give them a really serious lecture, invited them into my place to talk about it for a minute, which they did, kind of sheepishly. I guess they were scared to death I'd call their parents or something. And said, look, you're destroying brain cells. This is serious. I brought something up on the internet, showed them the article, and hopefully scared them enough that they quit doing it. I don't know. But it just underscored for me that if you made everything that could possibly change your consciousness illegal, if there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the culture, a lot of people that lack a context, that don't fit in, that are looking to change their consciousness, are going to damn well find a way to do it.
Yeah, I remember it was about 1983 when I first heard of huffing. And at the time, kids were using spray paint in a plastic bag. And they would come home. The school told the parents that if you see your child with spray paint all over his face, don't dismiss that. And of course, the spray paint coats the lungs, and kids were suffocating. And
yeah. Well, I'm sure that having lubricant coating your lungs isn't a whole lot better. Whatever it is, it's dangerous substances. I think I subsequently read an article about it. It was some sort of household cleaner that they were also shooting into bags and huffing. But yeah, it's just the desire to do anything to change your state of consciousness. It's just pretty crazy.
Middle school age children don't have that sense that they can really do anything to hurt themselves. They think it's just a minute of fun and no harm done, and that they don't realize until it's too late that there is some, and I've heard that's also very addictive. Even using a spray can of air that people use to clean out computers, that was a big deal around 1990.
Was it really? Okay.
Air. And I remember one person I knew came to me and said, "It's just air." And I said, "If it's just air, why does it make you high? And why did you just pass out?"
Yeah.
He couldn't stop. And
got to be something else in it if that's the case. Yeah. Well, I think that's what you run into. It's this absolute obsession with escaping your current state of mind. So when the person I found involved with it is my daughter, I was still outside of the experience, the phenomenon of addiction, looking in. It was so much more than what she was. Passing at the age of 41 and having gotten sober by about age 36, she had by then spent about 15 years immersed in that world, 13 of them in the debilitated state, where the normal experiences of those ages, further training, deep immersion in one's profession or marriage and family, building a home with a mate, perhaps pursuing a paying hobby in addition to one's vocation, all of this bypassed her. The view of her world narrowed and collapsed over the years of addiction, rather like the diaphragm of an old film camera, narrowing the focus to the smaller field where and how one could obtain the substance, where and how to use it, and avoiding the execrable effects thereof saturated the entire life. As with most of her new self-definition of an addict, life was a whirlwind of 12-step meetings, psychotherapy sessions, seeing addictionologists, psychiatrists. This was the medical part of it, since in the stupor of addiction, the supplier assured her an ongoing supply if only she would go and cash a couple of larger checks for him. She did. And here's where the legal element of the whirlwind, lawyers, probation officers, and later parole officers, and incarceration all come into the picture. This was to give me, as an outsider, a view into how not only do the decisions and lifestyles of the addicted tend to keep them there, but how they are further marginalized by the machinery of the state to make escaping addiction that much more difficult. Those of us outside law enforcement would think that since she could tell the officers the man's name who gave her the checks, since his prints, the one who actually stole them, were still on it, who gave it to her and told her by his own admission that he stole it, the company from which he'd worked and taken them and handed them to her, tearing them out of a larger check binder at the office of the company from which he worked, and then filling them out, forging his former boss's signature, that the police would be all over this, seeing this guy as the paper hanger, the guy writing fraudulent checks, as being a much bigger prize than the hapless addict who goes and cashes it for him. But no, that was not to be the case. They were eager to hang her and completely ignored. We're not even interested in this guy. And this, I found out, was pretty typical. They picked the low-hanging fruit, and the thing you see on Dick Wolf's crime dramas on TV, that's not how it works. They're not going up the chain trying to bust the big cheese. They're looking for the quick fix, the easy case. That's how the system works.
that's
And
rough.
the big guys who keep doing it, when one addict gets locked up, running an errand for them, there's another one whom they front some product to, and as they give it to them supposedly for free, and in exchange for that, expect the addict to go and run an errand for them.
And that enables the whole thing to continue.
Exactly. Yep. So part of it is the point of view of law enforcement, which these people are completely expendable. They just want to catch the person who's on the bank video cashing the check. So this pattern, after a series of small offenses, enough overall to result in several months here and there and a couple of state prisons, ended up with the last violation being where she was driven to a Starbucks and asked to rob at the behest of a drug dealer, waiting out in the car, sitting out in his car, in full camera surveillance view of a highly surveilled area and not a good part of town, where there were overlapping surveillance videos of the parking lot, again, which they had no interest in whatsoever, while the thug and one of his associates sent her in to supposedly rob. Well, she didn't actually rob it. She grabbed the tip jar and went running out. She didn't have a weapon. Nevertheless, they said the clerk was scared of her, thought she might have a weapon, and therefore tried to charge her with armed robbery, even though she had nothing and did not present anything nor claim to the clerk. So this is typical how it works. And they, of course, completely ignored the fact that there was the dealer and one of his associates sitting out in the car waiting for her with the tag of the car fully visible, fully identifiable. This just completely nothing done about it whatsoever.
That sounds pretty bold on the part of the dealer. I guess he must have had enough experience with this to know that he would not be caught.
I think they actually do develop, that's part of their street sense, knowing that what the cops will and will not do, that if you're out there, they're not going to even bother running down the lead. They're not even going to bother checking license or checking the car. And that this guy probably had a long record himself, even checking out who's visible on the videos from the various stores who were overlapping that particular high traffic area in a busy shopping center to identify him. No, there was no interest in it whatsoever. It was just, let's just hang the person who grabbed the $26 worth of tips in the tip jar. Let's make that our felony. So that's kind of how the system works. And so neither they nor the dealers were charged. Well, out of the scope of this memoir of her, he offered this explanation that some were, and this seemed to make sense to me, that some might be confidential informants who they're allowed to keep offending as long as they offer up other dealers or other criminals to the cops. So they and the district attorneys keep their conviction rate up, they keep their arrest rate up, and they make good newspaper lines or today, radio, TV, internet, whatever, where they're out there, curbing crime as they're using one criminal to simply finger his competition. And this is what largely passes for law enforcement, whereas the confidential informant is allowed to pretty much do whatever he wishes with impunity, unless it just gets too egregious. If he goes and mows down a bunch of people, get that on camera, yeah, they'll have to arrest him, but probably someone from another jurisdiction.
It's a pretty ineffective system.
Yes, very much so. So this is kind of how it works. And again, if you're connected to an addict going through all this, you see it like you would never see it otherwise. In the medical sphere of experience, it is much the same. The addicted person is stuck, fixed in his or her low status and their own choices and lifestyle, but also by the responses of the medical community to them. As a parent of an addict, I had occasionally been able to have a frank discussion. One of these in family therapy, where she and I and my ex-spouse, her mother, were meeting with a psychiatric social worker. She explained that healthcare providers often feel set upon by addicts who will even injure themselves in order, it would appear, to justify getting a prescription for an analgesic, a painkiller. Well, I can't even imagine anything recreational about going around drooling on myself should I swallow a handful of pain pills. For many of them, this is a siren song. I could remember during that session a friend of hers from high school, Chris, a very bright young man who'd been assembling custom computers during his last year of high school, for whom electronics had always been a hobby. he would run off the road on his motorbike, as he did once, I know of. He told her about it also, banging up his legs and getting multiple lacerations, only to be disappointed as the emergency room doctor gave him what was just an extra strength naproxen sodium, marketed as Aleve. To the provider, dealing with self-inflicted accidents, sorts of issues, while the addict is stoned or self-inflicted harm to justify a prescription, these are huge distractions from the business of providing health care to those who really did suffer accidents or who really do need medical services due to no participation of their own. So it's kind of understandable how they start to view addicts as a nuisance or even as a threat to their distribution of their services across the system.
Well, it sounds to me like the medical system, as well as the justice system, they're looking for some blanket rule that covers everything and pretty much keeps them from having to work too hard. It's like, let me take the easy way. Everyone follow this same rule, and whether it applies or not, and they're not looking at the individual situation. It kind of boils down to, how do I get my money?
Yeah. Well, and how do I process X number of cases? So we're not talking about curing anybody. If it's the medical side, it's just, quote, manage, end quote, the case. You got depression really badly. I can't fix it. Rather than admitting that I can't fix it, I don't want to bother doing the therapy or digging down deeply to what may be causing it. I'll just blanket you with something really strong like, I can't remember the name of that thing. Started with an L. Anyway, something where they're basically drooling on themselves. They're just zombified. So, of course, they're not experiencing depression. They're not experiencing anything else either. They're completely blanked out, just completely suppressing the emotional life. So there are ways of appearing to, going through the motions of resolving a social issue without actually doing it. And our institutions do that, certainly.
As a Tietia, is there something you can do? I know working with your own daughter would be very difficult, but if someone came to you and said, I have an addiction problem, I really don't want to do it again, are you able to reach in and do something to help the person?
Well, the fact is, interestingly enough, since you're absolutely right, it's very difficult to work with your own progeny. She was dating this very bright guy for a number of years. On and off, they really had a thing for each other. And I'll just call him Clark. That's not his real name, but he was did very well in engineering school and so on, but he would get into these drugs, sometimes get very dysfunctional. At one time, he kind of sent her a plea for, can you come help me? I'm having trouble cleaning my apartment. And I went over to help her because she didn't have a ride at the time. And the place stank. There was, he had with the little dogs, and I think they were incontinent. At least they didn't have a designated place to do that, which they needed to do. So that was all over the floor. There was laundry all over the floor. There were unwashed dishes, literally fermenting in dishwater in the sink, this sort of thing. And I tried to get down to the basis of what was happening with Clark. It turned out he was seeing an addictionologist and a neurologist and a psychiatrist, each of which had him on a particular set of medicines. I think he was on 17 different mind-altering or psychotronic, neurology-altering drugs of one sort or the other. And, of course, they were milking it because his dad was a high NASA official, so he had really good insurance, and they were milking him for all he was worth. So he was so over-medicated, he could scarcely function. Now, at this moment, he wasn't even doing street drugs. This was just the psychiatric stuff.
Wow.
So, yeah, this happens. And if you're a juicy target with good insurance, they will milk it, and they will pile on the prescriptions. And because each time there's a prescription, it means that many mandatory doctor visits during the year to maintain your prescription, as dictated, of course, as the FDA tries to manage each individual practice by the FDA. And, of course, it generates more business for the practitioner because he or she can say legitimately, well, look, I can't give you more even though it's a really common sense thing, like if you have X symptom, quit using and call me. No, you don't trust that there's any common sense or follow-up whatsoever in your patients. So let's force them to come in and pay that $95 to $150 to put their foot over the threshold of your office to spend that golden 3 minutes with the medical divinity, the MD. And so they do. So it's a very profitable system. But anyway, this was just an example of the sort of abandonment of your own self-responsibility and self-determination that comes with the addictive personality. Now, in his case, at this point in his life, he had transferred addiction from the street drugs to the psychiatric, but it was the same damn mechanism in place. So, yes, says Chetty, I did work with him. And in his case, he actually got a turnaround because, of course, he wasn't my daughter or son, so he would actually listen to me. We could actually make progress together. And he certainly wasn't going to listen to his own parents, who were both very functional people. No, both engineers, as a matter of fact. He was going to kind of ignore it and keep floundering around. And we, of course, dealt with one of the reasons for floundering around was some inner motive of being the family's only fuck-up. Okay? Everyone else was highly successful. All the cousins were highly successful. Everyone was constantly comparing him to all these other people as his role models. So this kind of the pressure, I think, sometimes people rise to the occasion with pressure. Sometimes they just fade away and say, I can't do this anyway, so I'll just not even try. And that was the point he'd gotten to. But I pointed out to him, finally, communicated this was a form of self-sabotage. Wasn't working, and he wasn't beginning to live up to his inner capacity or his capability, not even close. So eventually, this resulted in his getting off all of that. And I think he still is on a minor dose of maintenance stuff from shrinks. He's probably always going to have some sort of dependency there, but not three overlapping ones, and not the constant addiction to psychotherapy and medical attention. And some of it is attention seeking. You have to understand with the addicted personality, there often is either a true lack of nurture, certainly wasn't Kirsten's case, or a perceived lack of nurture, like people didn't give me enough, mom didn't love me enough, etc., to justify your aberrant behavior later.
So the core issue.
So what are you doing when you are constantly over-depending on these shrinks? You're getting that care, even if it's a very momentary care and it's just based on money, but you're getting that care from the medical system. You're getting that attention from the healthcare providers. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the core issue could be seen as the individual not being willing to take responsibility for the self, saying, you did this to me, the world did this to me, now you owe me, and now there's entitlement, and you get stuck in that.
Well, you're pointing out another factor besides the entitlement, is the victim mentality. Yeah. The world did this to me, the parents did this to me, the job did this to me, the society did this to me. I'm a victim.
And so now I need this substance to get through my day.
Well, I'm medicating myself because it's the only way I can get through the day. Yes. There's all kinds of justification mechanisms baked into the stew here. The terrible witch's brew that is the addict's life.
So that mentality could be seen as a red flag. If you hear somebody who says, I need this, whatever this is, to get through my day because the world did this to me. It's like, oh, there's an addiction. Even if it's not an illegal substance, it's still something. There's a red flag, something to note there that may need some attention.
Well, also, what people on the outside don't understand is the addict lives a very dangerous life. Mm-hmm. They're exposed to dirty, dangerous people, many of whom would cut your throat if they don't like the way you smiled at them or thought you made fun of them when you didn't, or whatever it was, some imaginary insult. People are themselves very mentally unstable, who often themselves are addicts as well. Even some of the dealers are. Contrary to popular wisdom, sometimes they actually are big users themselves. And being in this lifestyle, you do get hurt a lot. And when you get hurt, of course, you develop real injuries. And then, of course, as soon as you're branded an addict, and here's how the branding comes about. It's not like you go in and volunteer yourself, say, hey, doc, I've got a problem with drug addiction, in addition to the fact that I just got my jaw broken while trying to do this transaction with a mentally unstable pusher who just hauled off and slugged me. This happened to her on one occasion. No, it comes about because when the doctor detects something in their behavior, even knows how to assess them visually, like they're unkempt, they don't take care of themselves, maybe they haven't bathed recently. As a female, maybe there's no attempt at the normal grooming that women do, not even combing the hair. There are a lot of things that might give it away, not brushing the teeth. Any number of things that might say this person's incapable of self-maintenance, they may be an addict, so then they get a drug screen done. Now that's on record of the clinic, the hospital, whatever. Now you got a profile. From now on, you'll be treated as a pariah because you're an addict. So then you're put in this box. But it is a dangerous lifestyle. On one occasion, she had moved to Memphis without checking with her probation officer. And probation officer just paid a surprise visit to, at the time she was living with her mom. Her mom's house, she wasn't there. Our mom quite honestly said, well, look, she's living out of town. Well, you get her to my office immediately or I'm going to have her arrested, blah, blah. And the lady was actually being pretty reasonable about it. She had grounds to throw her in right there for having moved out without permission. My ex goes and gets her. They're coming back into town, driving, as best my ex recollects, around 55 or 60 miles per hour. Kind of slowed down. I guess there's some culverts or something coming in on the interstate. And she opened the door and threw herself out while the car was moving. Okay. She hit the ground, rolled, and surprisingly didn't break a bone. Side note to this, and this is where, again, work as a as a healer, sometimes the strength of what we do surprises me because we're just the, how to put it, the catalyst for it. As priests and priestesses, from our perspective, the gods and goddesses are actually doing the healing. Well, I had placed a protection on her, similar to the warrior's protection I'd placed on my son before he went to the war in Iraq, to be there for the next 15 months back in 2007 or 8. I forget which it was. I think it was 2008, during the troop surge. And it was to protect her from exactly this kind of mischief. So the weird thing was, and this is how I think they work in the background of our events, there just happened to be an ambulance that was coming back from making a run to a regional hospital in another town, coming back with an empty ambulance. They saw her jump out of the vehicle and hit the ground and roll all over the interstate before finally coming to rest against what's called as metal guardrails that keep a car from running off the road. And they stopped immediately, scooped her up, and she was in the trauma unit at the local hospital in less than 15 minutes. Really remarkable.
Yeah, that is remarkable.
But as a result of that, there was a nervous system injury, as best the neurologist could figure, which caused dyskinesia, a difficulty with coordination, and a tendency for the hands to shake and that sort of thing thereafter. So it's just surprising that she survived that. Such a fall could have easily been fatal. Such a jumping out of a vehicle, trying to commit suicide. Anyway, she did end up going to the probation officer after coming out of the hospital from that event, and she didn't get locked up. But that's the kind of lifestyle, the dangerous lifestyle they lead. Always one step ahead of danger. And so they develop legitimate, real medical contingencies, deep and long-lasting injuries, all of which cause the need for more medical attention and intervention, while all the time the system's trying to give them less and less care because they're viewed as pariahs. Unless, of course, they've got really good insurance, wealthy parents with good coverage who can keep them in, psychiatrists and addictionologists and psychologists and counseling and keep them in that loop indefinitely, in which case they'll be milked while they continue with their addictive lifestyle generally.
And that sounds frustrating.
Yeah, so you're looking in at all of this. And let me get back to what I hit my notes here. Well, the day that she passed, she was, just to expand on the medical part of this conundrum that you're dealing with, either as the addicted person yourself or as a loved one of, or a spouse or girlfriend, boyfriend of someone in addiction. The thing that actually killed her was she bought a pill to help her because she was going to go into a regional hospital in a nearby large city the day that she passed to have a debridement done. Amongst the other injuries picked up along the way, medical problems picked up along the way, was MRSA, flesh-eating bacteria, which had manifested in the acetabulum and femur and caused her to have an operation in 2016 where the femur and acetabulum were removed and an appliance placed there and a hip replacement. I think in part because the orthopedic surgeon, I was there at the time, she was assessed for it because I had to give her a ride, and she just asked me to be there. So I didn't mind if he didn't. While he was talking to her about her options surgically and all that, he just told her what was going to be done, told her about the implant, never even asked her if she had any allergies to any of the substances used in the implant. Now, of course, at this point, she already has a profile as an addict. This may be part of it. So she's basically just trash in the view of the medical system. So I brought up the question in front of him. He's a very prominent local orthopedic surgeon, kind of considered a dean of the community. I said, well, Dr. So-and-so, if you place this in there, have you taken into consideration the fact that it contains nickel? Well, why is that an issue? I said, well, very simple. It's an issue because even when she was in high school, I remember getting her a pair of earrings, and she had an allergic reaction to them. I had to take them back and exchange them for some that, rather than having stainless steel mountings, had silver mountings, which I didn't mind doing. At that point, we became aware of the fact that she did have a sensitivity to stainless steel. If you put anything with stainless steel in it, with nickel alloy in it, her body's going to reject it. Well, that's not a problem, he says. We'll simply redo it. I said, well, there's going to be tissue damage when there's rejection, isn't there? Well, a little bit. I says, doesn't that mean you have to go in and take out more bone, more tissue? Well, yes, but we know how to do all of that, and we'll just make a larger appliance that covers more area to give the patient the support they need. And so this is a cash cow for you. I didn't say this, but I was thinking it. It's a perfect cash cow. Put in something that doesn't work, and well, you'll just get another operation, and we'll make another $50,000, another, $3,000 per hour for my salary for doing the operation. And you'll just suck up the issues thereof, because we didn't really care to test you and see if you could handle this or not.
Sounds
tough
like
luck.
Your daughter was treated like a disposable resource.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Because she had good insurance. Under this Obamacare thing with this Affordable Care Act, we could actually buy a pretty good comprehensive policy for about $600 a month, which actually covered the vast majority of things that she ran into. Still a lot of copays and a lot of deductible, but a heck of a lot better. I mean, it's been absolutely unaffordable. This lifetime of extreme care following all this. So anyway, it's just an example of how it goes with the medical care system. So this being the case, with this background of how it works, the day of her passing, 2 days before, I'm riding around with her in the car. She was really happy to have just gotten her driver's license back. She'd been sober for 5 years. She just settled everything legally, where she was going to be on probation for a while. Then she was going to be okay. Everything in her life was looking up. She was even supposed to start a job as a peer support counselor the next week, which I thought was a huge job forward after not having been gainfully employed for most of her adult life at this point. This was wonderful news. It does so much for your self-image when you can take care of yourself. So we were riding around and she's talking to this guy. I knew he was. I'd met him on occasion, who lived next door to her. And he's living with his baby mama. And they have a child together, of course, and all of that. So he was getting her, and this was a common thing she'd do before she went into the hospital. She knew she wouldn't get enough pain reliever, muscle relaxants, all the other things to be comfortable in and after the procedure. So she would bring something in with her. And this is a pretty common thing. I found out that having attended a couple of meetings with her AA group or NA group that addicts do as a coping mechanism. So she gets it from him. He says he got it from his baby mama. And in reality, I'm sure he'd gotten it on the street. And it was laced with Chinese fentanyl. And that's what stopped her breathing. So she basically died of two things on that occasion: an open border where the fentanyl comes across, China's being our most favored trading nation partner, despite this chemical warfare attack against the U.S., where they set up these labs in Mexico to manufacture what look like prescription medications. The color's right, the markings on it, the numbers are right, everything's identical, and yet it's been poisoned with fentanyl, and their fentanyl they make is far stronger, many times stronger than what is available for chronic pain patients in the U.S., where it can be legitimately used and prescribed. Mm-hmm. So these are the factors that all met on the day of her passing.
So it's not like she relapsed. It's more like she was put in a desperate situation, and she saw the street drugs as the only way out.
In this case, what she thought was just buying a legitimate, it was a Percocet. I don't know too much about Percocet, but it is some sort of strong pain reliever, a lot less strong than what, addicts would usually take to get high. And so she gets this one Percocet. That's all it took. That's what she took at the time of her passing. So this is not uncommon. So this is kind of how they interact with and don't interact with the medical care system. Another system that these addicts interact with is the system of so-called halfway houses, rehabilitation facilities, and they're quite often really a farce. She was in one. They're often set up by what appear to be church groups that don't necessarily have a real church affiliation. The one she was staying at in a nearby city, they had constant brainwashing prayer services several times a day. And a lot of these women had a child or children living with them. They had a little dorm room. It was a former, what was it called? Assisted living facility. And I think the building had probably been condemned or something. It was quite old. The people living there would speak of having pet rats in the rooms and stuff like this. They were so very frequently seen. And the owners of it, again, this is how the addict is abused and used in the system. They got a sheltered workshop certificate. So the owner of this, who later kind of had to back out from it, his wife continued running it because he got one of the ladies pregnant there. He was continually prospecting amongst because it's an all-female thing.
Oops.
And he was a more handsome-looking, younger-looking guy than his wife, who probably was 10 years older, but it was kind of a money bag, I got the impression. So anyway, he would take them out. He got some sort of a deal with, I guess, HUD to go and rehabilitate abandoned houses. So every day these young women would be coming back. I happened to be there one time to visit her or take her for a doctor's appointment nearby, something like that. And just kind of spend the day with her. I tried to visit when she was in rehab to be supportive. And they were coming back from work, and their faces were just covered with, I guess it looked like stuff from the gypsum in the walls, fiberglass, probably asbestos from really old buildings, and just looking beat to death. And I found out they were basically just working for room and board. And they fed them on donated food, often stuff that restaurants were throwing out and expired food that people donated to the place. This is a good Christian healing community had going on here with all of this. So they were a cheap labor source. And of course, he was getting full rate for all these people and making a killing off getting this rehabilitation done on these houses. On another halfway house that she stayed at, the two minority gentlemen who were running the scam, I will call it, were actually pimping some of the women who were unfortunate addicts living there, and one of whom was her roommate. And her roommate, the way she found out about it was when she was newly there, her roommate invited her to go and sit down with the owners. They have a way you can make some money here. They wanted to share this with her. Well, the way of making money was that they would introduce them to friends of theirs who wanted to, quote, party, end quote, for a fee, and they would take care of their friends. And so her roommate was making really good money doing this and had all these privileges to come and go when she wanted, kind of do what she wanted, even get high and still stay there because she was making the owner's money. So they were basically running a service out of this rehab facility. So these things are very, I guess, partially because they're usually under the guise of a religious organization. This one was also. They had the church services on Sundays and Wednesday nights, the whole deal. Like they're kind of left alone. There's not really a lot of scrutiny by public authorities or by public health services. The state, federal, they tend to leave them alone.
So once someone establishes themselves in the world of addiction, it just seems like they go from...
You're preyed upon by everybody. Absolutely. You're a little fish, and there's nothing around you but sharks.
But first, the individual becomes what they call a user, and then once they become a user, they have other people using them their entire lives everywhere they go.
They are completely a consumable item at that point. And this even extended when she was in the state facility, the women's prison. Several of the guards got inmates pregnant. It wasn't an uncommon thing. Finally, the Justice Department went in and took it over and started enforcing certain standards. There was one occasion where a lot of inmates got sick because one of the refrigerated food trailers outside the kitchen, they hadn't expanded inside, so they had these outbuildings. The power had failed, so this whole massive amount of chicken and so on had gone bad. Well, they continued serving to them anyway. And this would be typical of what went on there. The horror stories of that place would make a whole book on their own. It was basically like a third world institution right here in the supposedly United States. So in this case, I was glad that the Justice Department did it. It's one of the good things that Obama did was actually calling attention to seriously substandard prisons and getting his Justice Department involved with a lot of them. This just happened to be one which come to attention. So again, the inmate is totally at the mercy of all these forces. And of course, they've abandoned their mooring, what you should have in normal society, in this religion of addiction, where the substance replaces the holy moment, replaces the transcendental moment. Instead, there's just this moment of escape when the high hits in and the separation from pedestrian reality takes place. And so part of the challenge we have, to get back to what you were saying, as a rehabilitator, as a therapist working with this population, is to try to teach the individual this is not a bad instinct to have, to want to escape your circumstances, escape reality, but there are healthy ways to do it. One is getting absorbed in something that really matters to you, that you're passionate about, some work that matters to you. That's one form of escape. Another can getting involved. And the common denominator here I'm going to give you is the word intensity. We all need a certain amount of intensity in our living. And this is a way of finding intensity. Some people find it in drama. And the addict normally is somebody who, before they're ever diagnosed with one form of addiction or the other, is addicted to drama. And in this addiction to drama, they run across dirty, dangerous people. They run into ungovernable and very challenging situations. And as their lives spiral out of control, they self-medicate with whatever the substance is. They try to escape the circumstances. So trying to get somebody to turn that around, find intensity in something healthy. Maybe it's working out really hard, immersing yourself in hiking, kayaking, whatever the heck it is. Doing volunteer work, whatever your passion happens to be, going to school, taking a lot of hours, working a job you care about. Healthy ways to do it, where it's not all about me, because yes, there's a huge element of both victimhood and narcissism. And the narcissism comes in where the addict kind of thinks that you, the parent, or you, the institution, or somebody, or the person whose house they break into, is to steal his or her stuff to hawk and pay for the next round of substance that they buy, owes them a living. And above all, you owe them getting high.
So really, for the person trying to recover, they have to end this idea that the world is doing this to me, and instead say, I'm responsible for what I do, and I'm going to choose to do this healthy thing instead.
Well, self-responsibility is a huge part of getting out of it. Finding an alternative way to have this experience, whether it's through learning to meditate or doing moving meditation like Tai Chi Chuan, or doing the Western equivalent to yoga, which is sports. Maybe you get out and run. I knew of one of the ladies that my daughter was involved with in a rehab facility in another city, came to see me as a client for several months after she got out of this, to stabilize herself and make a permanent break from. One of the things I suggest is you need to find some source of intensity. What do you like? We went through a detailed exploration of things she liked to do. What stops the gerbil from turning? What gets your mind off itself? What takes your mind off yourself? Well, I always liked walking and blah, blah, blah. So she ended up becoming kind of an extreme, what do you call it? Like an Iron Woman triathlete, not quite that level, but, kind of trying to do all those endurance sports. And by getting that deep involvement in that, you would kind of create this endorphin rush. You would get this runner's high, so to speak. This is a healthy high.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different ways. Some people try to find one blanket thing, like medication solves every problem in the world. It doesn't. Just like no one thing. There are no magic bullets. But there are a variety of things which can replace this need for intensity with a useful and productive and life-affirming sort of intensity. And of course, you got to get over the drama. You got to quit taking things that people tell you personally. And in my experience working with addicts, one of the first things they have to expect and do and be willing to do, and if they're not doing it, I'll tell them I can't help them, can't keep working with them, is to change the people and places who were triggers for doing it in the first place. Now, you can't make those people responsible for the fact that you may choose to go back to using, but you can take yourself away from, if you know that living in this place and you got somewhere else you could live, has all these users around, all these dealers around you, move to that other place where you don't have the dealer. You don't know every dealer on a first name basis. If you know that driving by this neighborhood, you know different places you can go and pick something up. Move to another place. Take another route to work where you don't pass by that neighborhood. There are a lot of ways you can set yourself up for success or set yourself up for failure. Another thing is that the addict absolutely must change his or her social circle to be around people who aren't in addiction themselves, who aren't reinforcing each other, where the topic of discussion isn't how you can get hold of X, Y, or Z and what it was like the last time you tripped. You don't need to be around people like that, or they're going to pull you right back into it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to, and you even have to go through the time period you'll go through where you lose one set of friends. I've seen several of the people I've counseled do this. And I'll tell them, you're going to have a hard period here where you feel very lonely. You lose your social circuit, but you will regain another one when you set your standard higher that you're not going to be around anybody who's using anything. And I mean, I'm including somebody who's a heavy drinker, a heavy smoker, anything like that. Anything that reminds you that where you're going to resonate with it to reinforce your own tendency toward addictive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So just in my own experience, these are some of the key things I think we have to work with in guiding people out of it and into a more meaningful life. And we need to help them cognitively define what that more meaningful life is going to look at. Set goals, refer to the goals, and think about how they're creating meaning in their lives, which is not pivoting upon or hinged upon the substance. So there's a way out. But the odds are against you. One of the reasons being, let's say you have COPD or you have some form of cancer. Well, obviously, 99% of the time, there may be some masochists or people who want to die anyway, where the death wish overpowers. But in most cases, the person with those disorders wants out of the disorder passionately. The addict, sometimes they just want out of it because, damn it, it's inconvenient. I get arrested. People treat me like shit. I've lost my family, my friends, my healthy friends. Everything sucks. I'm poor. I'm miserable. I'm in pain. I keep getting hurt. They want out of it for the external reasons. But inwardly, there has to be this conviction that I can't do this one more time. This rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
This absolute existential conviction that this can't go on. At that point, they can be rescued. They can come out of it. And you can try to lead them to that point, but this is the problem with turning an addict around, is it is a voluntary behavior. The person with cancer isn't choosing to have cancer. The person with COPD is not choosing to have it. Just for two examples, the person with Crohn's disorder is not choosing to have Crohn's. The person with addiction is largely choosing to remain an addict, to remain engaged with the substance. In closing, I'd like to say that if any of you would like to see a transcript from which I was working this story, which I've kind of wandered off and on from, but basically it's all here. If you'd like to send an email to the site, I'll be glad to email you a copy, no problem. And I'd also like to point out that if you go to teutonichealing.com and look up our blog, in the blog, I'm trying to remember what month this occurred, but we do have, it's called 8 Postulates of Addiction. It was a conversation in writing, in literature, between myself and my co-host, who's taking a sabbatical for a few months while he's doing some business development projects, who is a former addict himself, where he's talking about from an inside perspective. I'm talking about from an outsider perspective. You might find it an interesting discussion to read. 8 Postulates of Addiction in the blog on teutonichealing.com. You'll see the word blog right on the first page. Click on it. That'll take you straight to all these essays. Well, in conclusion, thank you very much for joining us today. Laurie, any other observations or questions or anything you'd like to add?
You provide a lot of good insight there.
Well, thank you for joining us, folks. Like I said, I know it's going to be an uncomfortable subject, a very dark topic. But if we don't shine light into the dark corners of our existence and our collective experience, folks, how can we ever bring light into it? Well, thanks for helping with the podcast, Laurie, and go with the gods.
Go with the gods.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shamanic Voices. We come out every couple of weeks and hope to add to your listening enjoyment at that time. If you have any thoughts about what you might like to hear, there's a response form, and you can always look at our recent episode, courtesy of our website, teutonichealing.com. That is to say, www.teutonichealing.com. That's TEUTONIC, healing, as it sounds, .com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Good day.